Welcome everyone to our second Africa Deep Tech Community Podcast.
Yay!
Just the fact that we're here alone is a miracle. Welcome to today's podcast. And on this podcast, we talk about everything deep tech as it relates to Africa and Africans. And when we're talking of deep tech, I love to use Eric Raymond's definition, where he said that deep tech refers to technology that was impossible yesterday, is barely feasible today, and will soon be so pervasive that it will be hard to remember life without it. Right? So we get to talk about stuff like that as it relates to us as Africans, and hopefully you're going to have a great time doing it. My name is Emeka Afigbo. I'm here with Oladimeji, and we are really, really excited to welcome our guests for today's podcast in the person of Judith Okonkwo. So yeah, they normally this is where the crowd will go wild and all of that good stuff. Well, yeah, Judith is a driving force when it comes to extended reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, all of that good stuff, building that ecosystem in Africa and exporting what we have to offer to the world. And so we're really excited to have her here with us. I guess I'll let her introduce herself and tell us more about herself. And from there, we'll just see where the conversation takes us. So, Judith, let our audience get to meet you.
All right. Thank you, Emeka. Can I say what an absolute pleasure it is to be here with you all today? I don't think there's anything better than talking about deep tech as it relates to the African continent, except maybe doing deep tech for the African continent and the world. So this is truly a pleasure. As Emeka said, my name is Judith Okonkwo, and I run Imisi 3D, which I describe as an XR being the abbreviation for extended reality, the umbrella term for augmented virtual and mixed reality. So as an XR creation lab, that is an ecosystem developer for those technologies across the African continent. I come to this via a rather varied routes. Professionally, I'm a business psychologist, and I did degrees in psychology and business psychology, and used to sort of practice in that space up until about a decade ago, right? 2013, 2014, almost exclusively. So spent my time doing that in both corporate and academia. And then I was sort of exploring one of my passions in that space, which is leadership, particularly as it relates to the African continent. And I was then attempting to do a doctorate on African leadership and living in Europe, and thought I should go and explore the continent more to facilitate that. So I hopped on several planes and visited lots of different cities. I got to Addis Ababa, I got to Nairobi, I got to Lagos, Accra, lots of amazing places. And those trips, I mean, they did a number of things, because my time in Europe was one where I was constantly trying to get people to understand that their constant sort of belief that there was a complete lack of leadership on the continent was unfounded, particularly when I thought about the amazing, truly hardworking young people that I had encountered. And so I was really looking for opportunities to validate that. Anyway, so those trips inevitably brought me to Lagos at a time when I suppose now in reflection, I describe it as a renaissance for the technology ecosystem. So if you were then the heady days of 2013 and 2014, people were so excited about what was possible. The tech communities were really growing at an incredible rate. A particular neighborhood in Lagos called Yaba was really becoming this sort of melting point for all things tech in the city. And it was beautiful to see, really, if you were there at that time. I don't think the infectious enthusiasm could escape you if you were there. Anyway, I was there at that time, and I sort of fell into the space because I met a number of young people who had gone to be super influential founders, and I kind of fell in with some of the work they were doing, one of which was a startup called Andela, which I think I don't underestimate when I say it changed the perception of African technology talent in the global space. So met the founders of that, helped them start up something you're doing that in Lagos and Nairobi, and then started thinking about what more I would do. At the time, I was on unpaid leave from a job in the UK, but then left that fully. And this is about 2015, where everybody's really gearing up for the uptick in the hype cycle when it comes to virtual reality, because then in those days we were still talking predominantly about virtual reality off the bat of that headline grabbing acquisition of Oculus by what was then Facebook just a short time before. And so for me, I was like, yeah, this is technology I'm excited about. I want to try it out. I want to get my hands on it. And I did because at the time I used to use a Samsung phone. So I upgraded to the next Samsung, and then they were giving out UVRs with the new phones. And yeah, I got my hands on one, 2015, put it together, put it on, and it was everything that I imagined it would promise. I think that's probably the way to do it because it was not just what it was able to do then, which was okay and which was something for the time, yeah. But just the potential, right, of what it could possibly do was still is, I think, yeah, absolutely mind blowing. Anyway, for me, I was like, this technology and all of its promise, those incredible people on the continent that I've just been working with all of their talent and determination and grit, those two things have got to come together. They've got to come together because from the get go, the first sort of like experience with the headset, I'm like, this is the future. It's inevitable. It might be a tomorrow future. It might be a 5 years future. It might be but it's happening for sure. And if that's the case, then African voices have to be a part of it. We have to help shape what it will be if it's going to become pervasive for humanity. So, Emeka, I really love that definition that you started off with in terms of what deep tech is, because I really do see that these technologies becoming pervasive. And apart from that, what is exciting about the technologies, particularly then for me, was that it was not boundary yet. Everybody described it as emerging technology. And for me, that meant that we're still figuring it out. We're still determining what it will be. And the we, it had to be all of us. It couldn't just be the we that's like Europe or North America or Asia. Really, if it was for all humanity, then all humanity had to be a part of making it happen. So I was like, what do I do about this? And the first thing that came to mind is, well, make sure people can get their hands on it, set up a space, get them started. And I, I was fortunate to have a friend who had a hub. And when I was telling him what I wanted to do, he's like, you know what? You can come sit up in our cool working space if you want with your stuff. And I'm like, great. I went to Amazon, I ordered some stuff, a couple of books. In addition to that Gear VR I had, I just randomly whenever I could get a Google Cardboard here, Google Cardboard there. And then I always tell people this really critical part. I went to Costco in London and I got a carton of Kit Kats. And and believe it or not, it's sort of a magic ingredient because when you've got lots of young Nigerians running around like wondering what to do, they will hone in on those chocolate bars and say, what's going on here? Is there a party? Can I have one? And what they do, you say, well, yes, you can. And have you tried out virtual reality before? And really, literally, we began from there. And then, of course, went on to do really great things like meet you, Emeka, and get support for some of our initiatives to get started.
Wow. 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 Put the look on your face when you were talking about putting on the Gear VR thing. It was almost like you were reliving that moment.
Yeah.
So like take us back to that moment because I think we'll get into this a little bit.
Mhm.
Maybe some people who are watching this may have tried VR, maybe they haven't tried it or
Mm.
not. So 2 questions. One, what was that? When was the real? I know you said you bought the Gear VR, and you were like, "This is something like this,
Mhm.
awesome." But like, what was the aha moment that you are like, I really need to get more people experiencing the? What was it about that experience? I don't know if it's possible to relate that.
Sure. So I have to say that even before I tried the Gear VR out, I was already super excited. So I'd mentioned that I was doing work with a startup called Andela before that. And while I was at Andela, actually, I was like actively trying to get the DK1 and DK2, but it didn't work out. So once sort of like I heard about it, I mean, I often explain to people that even in my life as a business psychologist, I was very interested in working with futurists and exploring sort of like going beyond the right now to think about how we position ourselves today for the future that we want, right? And I've always been interested in technology. So this was already an area that was super fascinating for me. So when I did finally get that Gear VR, I mean, first of all, it was a long time coming. It was like the at last, like why did it take me so long to get into my hands? But apart from that, I don't know how many people here would have tried to give me an experience from back in the day. But like the graphics were not the smoothest and everything, but still, you could be immersed in the CG environment where it was just like imagine the possibilities. And I think for me that was it. So even if it was, I remember that there were a whole slew of like experiences that we would show to people. So there was one where you would get to be in a car showroom and you could choose different cars and modify the features and stuff like that and so forth. For people who really like cars, that would be the thing that would get them interested. There was a Marvel related one where you were like doing something with Iron Man and all of that. So we would just actually go and like look at all these different experiences that would at least kind of like connect to something that you were already passionate about. Because what it was for me, and I have to say at that time, it was like being aggressively like, understand that this technology is more than gaming and entertainment, because of course that was immediately what people would get. To help them understand that like regardless of whatever field you were coming from or whatever your interests were, there is a way, like it was possible for this technology to elevate that for you. And for me, that was the most exciting thing, that I could go in there and I could just kind of like explore widely. For me, that was the thing that really got me going. I remember, I mean, we're Nigerian right now, all of us, yeah. So we know kind of like the folly of the green passport when you need to travel. And one of the things the young people used to say often when they would sit in the chair. So back then, there used to be this Oculus 360 experience that had an explore the world feature, and you could choose a country and then you could go and it'd be like 360 images or videos from that particular country. And I never forgot these people saying, "Oh my God, so you mean I can actually travel without having to go get a visa or anything like that?" You know what I mean? So with the technology, even as limited as the content was then, there was something to meet just about anybody where they were so that they could say, so this is just a hint of what might be possible. And for me, it wasn't about what was there then. It was always about what it would spark or what it would inspire. Because really, I don't think anything that was a standard. And people used to say to me, "Well, what do you think it can do?" And I'm like, let me be honest, I have no idea. Like, I'm not the expert. I'm not like a great like engineer or artist or whatever. But like everybody who tries it, if they let their imagination run, if they let their creativity run, like that's the magic. Imagine that being sparked everywhere. Like as many people as get to experience it with all of the experiences and expertise, that's the real thing.
I'm already like getting the goosebumps as you're talking about it. Because I mean, for you to have been really inspired by the Gear VR of all things, right? It wasn't. I'm reading a book now, Hackers by Stephen Levy, right? And he's talking about people who saw a computer, got introduced to computers like in the 60s and were excited to be programming in assembly language. Like for them, and that's, I guess, how a true believer, so to speak. Like if you're excited by a technology when it's not even exactly right, that means that you're for real. But okay, so let me bring us back down to earth a little bit, right?
Okay.
Let me be the voice of a non-believer, so to speak. So VR is great and all of that, everything you said. But in the context of Africa, especially the Africa of today, Nigeria, Kenya, Congo, Morocco, Tunisia, wherever, right? Like what does VR have to offer? Like what does interest in VR? Why invest so much in it? Like what does it have to offer? Yes, the pictures are cool. Being able to put on travel without a visa and have that 5 minutes of excitement when you wear the headset. But in reality, like why VR? Why Africa? Why now?
Yeah, I would go a step further and add to the question.
Yeah.
So speaking of like back then, like you were just listening to you took me back way back. So I had another life where VR and games. Actually, I used to work in games, and so that was my world. So this era of 2015 you're talking about, like it's taking me back there because I was in the Bay and the whole hype cycle got me caught up in the whole thing. So why, and listening to you, it just also reminds me of what like passion can, like, yes, we talk about deep tech, but deep tech is actually built by people that almost like ahead of the curve in your dimension and have that tenacity, vision, and perseverance to like stick through a particular technology and stuff. So, but for me, I got caught up in the wave. I saw the wave at some point and I jumped off the wave because I'm like, okay, this AR VR thing, I couldn't view its application beyond like what you mentioned, entertainment. So, and that's also given the context of Africa. It's like, okay, why VR and why AR VR from an African lens? Why is that an impactful technology?
And why did you choose to make that your life's work? Like, I mean, you talked about your profile, you could be doing anything, right? So why?
Thank you. These are actually perfect questions given who we are and what the conversation is about. So I talk about sort of like when I first got the Gear VR, and for me, it wasn't about what I could do then, but my belief in what it would be able to do. And I think if anything, that's what's still driving it. We are I don't even know the word to use, but aggressively like sector agnostic in terms of our application of the technology in our lab. And that's because really like I see it cutting across like multiple industries, disciplines, and all of that. But for me personally, an area that I've been extremely passionate about is education. For a very long time. I spent time in academia, I've like done all sorts, but I really, really see sort of like all of the hopes that we've ever had for the continent, Africa rising, falling, floating, whatever, will never ever be realized if we don't get that education piece right. And when I look at the continent and I look at it through the lens of a country like Nigeria and our public school system, a place like Lagos, or even if you think, about the very unfortunate statistics in terms of us having the most out of school children in the world, you know that you can't even begin to think about a traditional method to solve that. You know what I mean? I tell people that even if we were to divert our entire budget to education today, we wouldn't solve the problem. And that's because you can't overnight build enough schools, right? Brick and mortar schools. You're not overnight going to like deal with all of the social cultural issues that are keeping young people and girls out of schools in certain parts of the country. You're not going to all of a sudden overnight have enough qualified teachers. So what is it that you can do right now, today, that will actually make a significant difference? And for me, it's always been like, okay, so what kind of radical approach can we take and leverage a technology like this? And I can see that, like, I can still see, I mean, one of the reasons I got my current tour around is because I'm trying to get the support and the partnerships to do the kind of research that can bring this vision to life. And I'll paint it out for you. A typical public school classroom in a city like Lagos will easily have maybe 80 or 90 students and just the most basic infrastructure. So it's chairs, tables, and a black or white board. That's it. That's it. And I don't know about you, but like 80 students, one teacher, pen and paper. Like just thinking about it, I'm already running for the hills, right? Never mind the teachers doing this day in, day out in conditions that I just think they deserve a hero badge every single day. And I mean, yes, they're there doing the best that they can, but we're quite aware that it's just not possible to even come close to the quality of education that our young people deserve in that kind of circumstance. It's just not possible at all. So how do we get to SDG 4? And for me, it's always been a question of, okay, I know that for the most part, we want to be able to give our children the kind of learning experiences, regardless of where they are, right? So even if they're in that most resource constrained environment that is our public school, or at home, unfortunately, because they're not being allowed to come to school, what does it look like when we give them a learning experience that is similar to children in the most elite private schools, wherever they are in the world? And that is possible if you can put a headset on them that has that environment we created for them. That environment might be a science lab where they can do experiments virtually. It might be like a virtual field trip to somewhere where we hope that they would be able to go and see, but we know we can't afford to buy the tickets to get them there. It could be anything. And with the convergence with technologies like generative AI, we can start to see how you can actually populate those digital learning spaces with guides and digital teachers who can sort of like supplement what they're getting from the experience itself. And so for me, it's that. It's something that I know a lot of people are like, wait a second, is this in Nigeria where like electricity is not reliable from the grid yet and all of that and a whole host of other issues? And we've just been talking about the challenges with connectivity right now. Yes, in that space, if we can deploy a solution like this, it changes everything. It literally changes everything. And it's only possible with tech like this. And it's for reasons like that. It's not the most intuitive because people be like, wait a second, you want to take VR into a school like Oshadi or like how? Why? Like, where do you even start from? It might seem like that, but we've actually been going into school since 2017 with this technology. And it's schools like that. You go in, you start to build relationships with the leadership, with the principals and the vice principals and the teachers. You bring the teachers to the lab. You give them the tech and you tell them to let loose, explore with it. Because what you don't want to do is go into a school and say, we know how to solve your problem, because you don't. Very, very quickly, we found out we have no clue how to run things in a public school. We don't have that expertise. We don't have that knowledge. But we do have tech that we think can help. So teachers, come try it out. Come play with it. Come tell us how you think it might help you with some of your pain points. And if you tell us how you think it can help you, then we'll do that work for you and we'll work with you to make it happen. And that's what we're trying to do, right? So we had teachers come and, for example, we're working with a junior secondary school in Yaba. The maths teacher said to us, you know what, I'm doing maths with my students and teaching them algebraic expressions, but for some reason for the kids, it's just too abstract. They're not getting it. How can I bring this to life for them? What kind of experiences can we create where it's like they're seeing the math in everyday life? And so we went ahead and we created experiences where you're going around Lagos, you are interacting with your friends' parents on the street who are fruit sellers and things like that. You're playing the sorts of games that you probably played in your childhood, but have elements of algebra in them. You're doing it with like buying food and not buying food, those sorts of things. Like really bringing it to life for both the students and the teachers that have to work with them. A physical and health education teacher said to us, you know what I would love to be able to do? I'd love to be able to take my students to a hospital so they can speak to a doctor. We're doing non-communicable diseases now, but everything is just so theoretical. I want them to hear from a doctor. I want them to see in a hospital. And we're like, okay, we'll do the most basic thing for you. We'll take a 360 camera into a hospital. We'll sit with a doctor. We'll have him talk to the camera so he can speak to the students and tell them what you would like him to do. And so we'll bring that to you and to your students where you are. And it's little things like this. I mean, like these are the steps that will get us there. So for us, it's, yes, it might seem like this technology, Africa, yeah, maybe not. But suspend all of your anchors to like the current reality and think about what it is you would do if you could do anything at all to solve problems. And then let's start to make the tech work for us. That's the way we approach it. And I think with that, like, yeah, in my lifetime, we can solve SDG 4, right?
That's amazing. And actually, I think this is like a thank you so much. This is like a master class to me on like just a reminder for folks that technologists are actually dreamers, right? So and hearing you speak, it rekindles that dream in terms of like when you're trying to build technology for like deep tech for the future, you have to right from today imagine a world that probably sounds crazy, and from that imagination draw back on how we can get to tomorrow from to today. So that's very interesting. And even on a startup level, I think like company level, hearing you speak also gives a clue on how people can narrow down on a use case. And like, because what you said is so powerful in terms of like education, right? So most people, when there's like a new technology, usually I see a lot of people that try to let the money motive drive their instincts. But the technology game is usually a long game, right? And if you are just guided by money, I think you get burnt out quickly, right? Because it's like, yeah, it's going to be a hit or miss game for you. And you've been doing this for like, did you think it was going to be this long when you started
Yeah,
in
yeah.
2015?
I was actually going to piggyback on that to say, like, everything you just said, if it was anybody else saying it, right, I'll be like, yeah, right. Like, we hear this stuff all the time. But I know that you've been in this game, like you said, since 2017, maybe even before that, right? Because I think I met you before 2017. You were still saying the same thing you're saying now, right? With Imisi 3D, right? So can you talk to us a little bit about Imisi 3D, what the mission is and what you're trying to do, and how the ecosystem has grown? Like Baba said, like you've been on this journey for so long, right?
Yeah.
How has the ecosystem evolved? And what are some of the moments that rekindled your hope? That you're like, oh, this my dream is actually not just a pipe dream. Like
It's possible in your lifetime.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question. And I always appreciate the moments to just stop and reflect, because usually it's just go, go, go. And kind of like for me, I'm always thinking, we're so far behind. When are we going to catch up? So we started the lab in 2016, and it started with that question of access and Africans leveraging the potential of these technologies. And for us, our approach was to do this in 3 ways. The first was what I used to describe as evangelization, right? We wanted people to understand that these technologies exist right now, that it's not it's not like something in a sci-fi movie. It's not something that you can touch and feel right now. Wherever possible, we did want to give them that touch and feel experience of it. And that's why from day one, our labs have always been open access spaces. They're free. Anybody can walk in. You can try out the tech. You can sit down and decide you want to learn right there and start picking up skills to build if you want to. But that was really integral to who we are. And a lot of that evangelization piece, apart from obviously the inbound traffic into our lab, was also us going out to events. We would go out, we would do demos, we would talk about the technology, just really trying to get people to understand what it is. So that was one piece of it, that evangelization. A second sort of like equally critical piece for us was around building a community, an African community of XR creators, right? So often kind of like in all our decks, you'll see that strapline where we're trying to move from being consumers to creators of technology. That's really central to who we are and what we're about, because everything that I'm talking about, whether it's a solution for education or what other field it is, somebody's got to build it. And my God, it had better be us building it, right? We're the ones who can build what we actually need in a way that will work in the most effective way for us, the most impactful way. Plus, our people need things to do. It might as well be this, right? So we are very, very intentional about trying to grow community around these technologies, trying to upskill people. and kind of like do a whole raft. I mean, I tell people we've tried everything and the kitchen sink. We run online and offline communities. We do monthly meetups in Lagos. We do monthly masterclasses. We started a virtual monthly like meetup as well. We've done training programs. We've done scholarships. That's the standard degree. We do training online, virtually, in person, instructor-led, not instructor-led. We curate learning resources. We run hackathons because we're always trying to get people to build. It's not just acquire the knowledge, but how can you actually translate it into something that's relevant for you and society? What does that look like? And usually we have sort of like thematic guidelines for the hackathons where we're saying, well, what are the verticals where we think there's room for immediate significant impact for society right now? And typically it'll be areas like education or healthcare, tourism, conservation, that sort of thing, storytelling. So that community is the second piece of what we do. And the third and final piece has actually been the impact initiatives in sectors where we think there is that room for immediate significant impact with the technologies. It's why we have our VR for Schools program, which has been running since 2017. We also do work in storytelling, which if you follow the space, like right from early days, that was one sort of like beacon of hope for the technology in terms of its utility, was this realization that it could be this very, very powerful storytelling tool. The UN described it as an empathy tool as well to move hearts and minds. We also do work in healthcare. We do work in digital conservation. So a broad range. We're really looking at ways in which we are creating things that are beneficial to society on the continent right now. So it's been those three approaches. Over time, what that has looked like, I mean, certainly a lot of growth. So something like really interesting for me. I mean, we've always tried to be led by data as much as we can. So even in the very early days, I remember getting started up with the lab. We put a little survey out. We wanted to know if people were interested in having a lab, how often would they use it, things like that. And sometimes I go look back at that from 2016 and just go like, what are the odds? But then looking at things like how many people had tried out the technology and what they think about it, right through to in 2022, we published the first comprehensive report of the ecosystem in partnership with collaborators across the community, the African XR report. I just kind of like looking at sort of like the simple Google surveys back then to this really kind of like a mammoth 300-page document. It's like, oh my God, what a journey. I'm just looking at those stories. But in terms of what that growth looks like, I mean, there are some things. So once upon a time, I don't think you could have mentioned anyone that was doing something related to XR on the continent, and I wouldn't know who they were. Quite literally, I was on my money, and the community was small enough that I could actually keep tabs on everything. I'm thrilled to say that is no longer the case. Like every day it's discovering like, oh my God, they're doing this in this country, or there's that amazing person doing that over there. And I think that that's a really, really fantastic thing to say. I will say that there was a particular sort of like uptick in 21 with that sort of like Facebook to Meta shift and the whole Metaverse hype that happened then, that really seemed to signify globally that, hey, this is an area of interest and an area that has a lot of economic potential. And that kind of moved like youthful hearts and minds. So you started to see a lot more profiles on LinkedIn where people were like XR developer, XR enthusiast, that sort of thing. So that was great. But what has it? I mean, I think back to the early days, like 2016, we see some of the trends from that time still holding through. I mean, sort of like the major stalwarts on the continent in terms of these technologies remain South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria. And when you're looking at the MENA region, like Egypt, Tunisia, doing a little bit. That's still the case. But I think the exciting thing is that the many other countries that are now throwing their hats in the ring and doing really interesting things, and the support sort of like being more readily available across board. Yeah. But in many ways, the situation is still dire. In the early days, I used to really go on and on about the atrocious amount of support that the ecosystem on the continent gets. It has changed. I shouldn't even say change because it's just such like a tiny fraction. But for context, like if you saw, particularly in 2016, if you saw the sorts of numbers that were being invested in this sector, like it was mind blowing. It really was. Like billions and billions in Asia, North America, Europe, and all of that. And I often give people the example of Magic Leap, the mixed reality startup with a device that you can't quite get a hold of. But to date, they've raised $3.5 billion, and they raised that like a few years ago. And in 2019, the entire African ecosystem, tech ecosystem, by the way, had not raised that much. So it just goes to show there is no level playing field with this. There is no level playing field with these technologies and what they do. And we haven't even started to look at things like opportunities for learning or resources or research or any of the other things that are thriving in the space in other parts of the world that are almost non-existent on the continent. So I suppose if anything is to say bravo to the pioneers who, despite everything, are doing things. I mean, there's super exciting research going on in universities in South Africa. We have the brilliant Eugene Ohu at Lagos Business School with his VHCI lab, and like there are a number of others in like different universities across the continent, like really trying to do what they can with the very little they have. But there is just so much more, still so much more that can be done. But I think if anything, it's the resilience, as always, of the young people on the continent who despite everything are trying. I remember once I was writing a reference for someone who used to come to the lab, and I was trying to explain to whoever would read it, like what it means to actually be an XR enthusiast in Africa or in Nigeria, like in 2018 or 2019, and say, you have to understand, it's not a situation where you'll go out into a store and pick up a headset or try it on or anything like that. You've got to be intentional. You've got to look for where you can have access to it. Travel miles and miles to that place. Stay there. Commit your resources, as scanty as they might be, and do that over and over again. And this is with you hoping for electricity and hoping for like connectivity and all of that. And despite those odds and everything else you have to do, you do it over and over again. That's what has been accomplished by whoever you meet that has built up any level of expertise in these technologies back then. So yeah, we are progressing. There's a lot of change. It's bigger, much bigger now than when I started, but there's still so much further to go. Oh, and I mean, I think you said something like, what keeps me going? So recently in Lagos, we had this event called the Omniverse Summit, and which was at the end of February, and I was seated there, and a gentleman came up to me, and he's like, I don't think you remember me, but I met you about 5 years ago in Abuja. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yes, I used to work at Ventures Platform. And for context, in 2019, one of the things that we did with funding from Facebook at the time was to set up mini labs in 7 states across Nigeria. And we did this because we had seen obviously a concentration of activity in Lagos where we were able to provide support with our lab. And we wanted to try and get that spread out much more across the country. So one of the places we set up a mini lab was in Abuja then. And so he's like, yeah, I was in Ventures Platform where you set up the lab. And I'm like, oh, really? And he's like, yes. And he's like, and you know what? You completely changed the life of one of my mentees. And I'm like, really? Who? And he was telling me about a young man named Arole Ibrahim, who we met sort of like back then when we were setting up. So we'd set up the lab, we'd bring the equipment, and then we had a launch event where we would sort of like try and get the community started and all of that. And Army was there. He was very excited about the technology. We spent time talking. And this one told me that, and then he would subsequently kept coming in and all of that. And right now, I mean, Arome has started sort of like a number of initiatives, like in the immersive space for the continent, is globally recognized for the work that he's doing in the space as well. And I think sometimes it's just the little things to kind of like remind you that whatever you start, whoever you can get to have one of those experiences, you just never know where it's going to go. And I think in the same vein, you never know what they're going to build. So you just have to keep on going.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So Judith, if you don't mind me asking,
Yeah.
So it feels like in the space of deep tech and working on new technology, especially from an African lens, you're trying to solve for two problems, right? Broadly speaking, let's use your use case of creating world-class education via like AR, XR. So there's the tech possibility problem, like can we deliver something with the technology available today? And then there's the second problem of, okay, is it done in a way that will be impactful to Africa or Africans, right? So if we hold those two thoughts, how do you answer those questions? So in terms of like the tech answer, is this possible? Do we have, so is there like a skill set, globally just speaking, is there like a skill set gap? Like why is this experience not ready yesterday, right? Where we can have this immersive learning experience, right? So is it that we don't have people, or is there a talent problem? And is there like then on the other end, on the African problem, are there, with all the works you've done in like the community, are there local talents like considering this Like, and there's local talent that have the skill sets to be able to answer this type of questions.
Fantastic questions. So, is there a talent gap? Absolutely. In fact, more pronounced than any on the continent than anywhere else. And it's kind of tough because I think if you think about sort of like probably the more sort of like advanced VR experiences that you've tried out, like just from it's like a whole production suite that you need to be able to pull it off, right? You're in this, whether it's like an immersive animated experience or whatever it is. And just think about the production line that you would need from the developers to the animators to the UX people to the illustrators and the color. You know what I mean? A whole mammoth team of exceptional talent all in one place, able to work together. I think that that's pretty rare to find on the continent right now. And typically, the way a lot of the work is happening is that you'll find the small, scrappy but mighty teams doing the best that they can with usually a number of uber talented people who can wear a number of hats, and then bring in sort of like some contracting from other allied disciplines that would support the production of the work that they're doing, right? But unlikely that you just have that full studio. And that said as well, I will say that even the level of talent development is at a step back, right? So even when you find those talented people, it's talented people who have been educated in the University of YouTube, because those are the institutions that are providing like certifications on the continent for these technologies at the moment. I mean, now there are like a few universities starting programs at the postgraduate level, for example, but not yet that you can go into a university and say, I'm going to do an undergrad degree and kind of like ramp up all of these skills. And that's going to change slowly. I mean, for example, the African Leadership University in Kigali started a partnership with Meta, initially looking at Meta stock, but again, looking much more broadly about ways in which they can introduce XR to their curriculum and things like that. But it's slow. It's too slow. It's not. It's too far behind for our people. Never mind sort of like the cutting edge research that you see in other parts of the world, where kind of like young people are really getting to push the boundaries and explore. And some of the equipment you'll see in some of the other XR labs across the world that we haven't even begun to think of. So yeah, from a talent perspective, I think that there is still so much to be done. And like, I don't know if you remember, like back in the day when I was like, I wanted to do like scholarships and everything, and you supported us with money to do some of those Udacity VR nano degrees. When I was starting the lab, and this is just to let you know how super naive I was like, okay, so we'll get started and we'll get people to be excited about these technologies, and then in like, I don't know, 18 to 24 months, we're going to train 1,000 developers on the African continent. And the training plan was, so at the time, Udacity used to run this VR nano degree program. So I'm like, great, we'll put them through that VR nano degree, and then we'll get them sort of like some mentorship and on-the-job training and all of that. And at that time, Udacity's VR nano degree was $1,200, right? So 1,000 people were looking at 1.2 million. Then you start thinking about the mentors and the mentorship and all of that. So let's say like, kind of like you hope that maybe, 2 million to run that. Like all of the work we've done, we've not spent that amount of money. You know what I mean? In all of the ecosystem work we've been doing since. And that just shows you kind of like the black hole in terms of even trying to get like talent up to speed. If there isn't that investment, right, in our people and trying to get them the skills and the knowledge that they need for these technologies, then what are we doing? So a lot there, and a lot, I think, in terms of our institutions, academic institutions, are becoming more fit for purpose in terms of like fourth industrial revolution skills and all of that, which I think is slowly starting to happen. But the gap is there. Yeah.
No, but this is interesting. One thing that occurred to me to ask while we're on this subject of talent is, so what are the jobs to be done? Like, what are the different, is it, if I want to be interested in creating VR experiences, do I need to be a coder? What, a videographer? Like, what are the different skill sets or job categories that we have in this space?
Absolutely. I mean, sort of like the core one that people immediately think about is obviously VR development. And when I think VR development, I'm talking about actually building content, immersive content with one of the game engines that are most popularly used. So either Unity or Unreal Engine. And I think between those two, we're talking about probably 90% of XR experiences created are done with one of those two. So if you're a VR developer, you'll definitely have like skills in one of those two, if not both, because I'd say they're both probably equally popular. But apart from that, like with any experience that you're trying to create, and you just think about that sort of like fully immersive, whether it's CG or otherwise, you're thinking about things like UI and UX, like what is the experience of the person in there? Because it's not just about the mechanics. And of course, I mean, if you've tried VR, you know that there is a lot to consider when you're trying to immerse somebody in a different reality from your actual physical environment, just to make sure that they're safe and they're well and all of these sorts of things. And so you've got to kind of like find ways to take that into consideration. And typically your UI UX person, your researcher is looking at things like that to make sure that it's fit for purpose in that sense, for human consumption. There is obviously a whole raft to do in terms of the actual artistic quality of what is being put together. So apart from doing the mechanics and the actual interaction, what are the visuals, like what are the aesthetics, what artist is going to do that and all of that. Sound is a very big feature of immersive experiences as well. And you really want someone who really understands what that is like in that sort of space, because of course sound can be so powerful, and you see sort of like amazing binaural audio experiences and things like that. What does that look like when you're playing with that in an immersive space? Like what is it like when it's 4D sound and all of those sorts of things? So there's a whole host of allied things. Never mind like folks who might be working as producers, kind of like putting all of these things together and making sure that the final product is executed as it should be. So I think much like you would find in most other technology spaces, you'll find like the similar equivalent job in the XR space. And now when it comes to XR, like of course there's like immersive media. So we're looking at 360 videos, 360 photos. I mean, I know some XR purists will turn up their nose at that and say that's not real. So they're like virtual reality, but we embrace it anyway. And you'll see a lot of skills transference from people who do traditional 2D. So a lot of filmmakers or artists, for example, are saying, well, how do I expand the boundaries of my craft? And they're starting to explore with those immersive tools, 360 cameras, that sort of thing, to see what they can create there. Yeah, and then like bring that into play.
Thanks. And that's for the benefit of folks who are watching this and are wondering, okay, I'm interested in this VR thing, but I'm not a VR developer. Does that mean I can't participate?
No, you surely can't. Oh, and to add, I mean, there are really talented people out there who are saying, how can we make sure that everybody can create for these digital spaces? And so deciding to create like no-code tools for creating immersive experiences. So there are tools like SwiftXR, for example, which I like to toot because that's an African-grown solution right out of Nigeria. Please check it out. But there are lots of others like that where people have done sort of like the heavy lifting in terms of like the different components that you can put together to start to create immersive experiences. So if you want to dive in, there is a way. Don't feel too intimidated.
Wow, I didn't know about SwiftXR. I just checked it out now.
Okay.
Okay. This is
Same
wow.
here. Same here.
Oh my goodness. Okay. This is going in our project catalog.
Okay.
No, this is really cool. So let's start looking a little bit into the future now, right? We talked about this space that's changing so fast. Every other day, there's a new device coming out or some new innovation, hand tracking, this, that, that. And this brings to mind like things around governance and what is this new XR future? How is it being created? Is Africa part of the conversation, right? That's why I'm really stoked to see this Swift XR thing. Like the fact that somebody in the region is creating a tool that helps other people in the region to create, or even globally to create.
Globally, yes, we do have global customers. It's exciting,
Wow. So, like, what? Just maybe give us your stream of consciousness on this whole governance, the future of XR, Africa's role.
Absolutely. I mean, as you can imagine, once that Metaverse hype took off in 2021, all of a sudden it was like on everyone's radar, much like generative AI is like on everyone's radar now. And of course, there were all of these initiatives set up around the world, looking at Metaverse standards, governance for the Metaverse, all of those sorts of things. We're seeing the same things with AI. And I mean, yes, we definitely should have governance for these things, but much like I was complaining about when I was talking about the funding and where it's going, the question for me is always who's governance and who's technology? Because if you look around the table at the people who are having these conversations, I mean, the rooms that I've been in, often I'm the only Black African woman in the room. I have like the people there. If that's the case, we've already failed because there's no way me, like, you know what I mean? One like person is representing 54, like how a billion people, like it's just not possible, right? So, and part of the reason for this is the access question, the access problem, because of course you can't bring people to the table to talk about what they don't know. So you've got to make sure that they have access to the technology too, so that you have informed voices at the table saying, okay, so from our perspective, this is what the technology means for us, and this is how we think it should play out in the future for all of us, right? This is what's important, like in line with what is important for you guys, where you are. And that's not happening. And for me, the risk is that all of the things that we're complaining about with technologies today and kind of like inherent bias and all of those sorts of things, that we're just towing the same path, which I think in 2024 is quite frankly ridiculous. We should know better. We should do better. But unfortunately, the systems, the state is not incentivized for anybody to do anything different. We'll do the talk, but nobody's actually doing the walk.
Mm.
What does it look like when we say that actually these technologies should be available for everyone? That means that we're then not saying like, oh, what's the use case? What's the market size in that region? How much are we going to make? And how many organizations are willing to not do that, right? Or what are the structures are we putting in place in the world so that at least for a time we hold back on that and say, let's all create like a standard kind of like foundation for these technologies for everyone globally, and then take off from there. And that's not happening. So for me, I mean, we say governance, we say all of these things, and of course things that we put in place. I mean, I think earlier this week some of the first AI laws in Europe came into being and things like that, and that's great for Europe because of course they can have that kind of informed conversation, right? But when these things start being applied to them like globally, or you start seeing repercussions in other parts of the world, then what does it mean? I remember in December, last year, the year before, I can't remember, but there were these sets of roundtables and sessions looking at issues like trust, security, and privacy. And this was run by Meta and I think a Democratic Initiative out of Stanford. And it was done with regions of participants like all over the world. So you'd have like folks from Europe, folks from Africa, folks from Latin America, Americas, etc., just all asking and contemplating issues to do with the trade-offs, right? Like between like privacy and safety and things like that in the metaverse. And I think for me, it was particularly instructive when you're in spaces like that to just look at the differences in terms of the conversations, depending on what part of the world you're engaging. What is the experience of people having these conversations where they're not hands-on with the technology compared to those that are, right? And I think we're seeing that kind of like expand further and further out where this digital divide is really expanding. And for me, that's particularly tricky. That's particularly scary. And it's like every day the work that we're doing is like, how do we claw that back, right? How do we get more informed, more people able to contribute to those conversations, more people able to demand more for the continent?
Just hearing you talk about it, like, I'm wondering, like, we have this meeting or this event where people are mapping out what the metaverse is going to look like, right? That's basically, it's almost like, I don't know, maybe you go to colonizing a new planet or something, and then you are sharing, like creating this new world. Sharing land, like this.
I tell you, it's so freaky. So I saw something earlier today. You probably saw it all, where it said Nigerian Space Agency had paused their whatever. I was thing that struck me, like in that article, was that they said it would take 5 years to get a launch slot for to go to the moon. And I was like, 5 years? Other people are like taking up all the time, and they're like, oh, but then maybe the astronaut. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? And you put a pause on things and it takes 5 years. You know what I mean? Like, what are you doing? Yeah, anyway.
Instead of you to be poorly, that's what your focus is.
No, I mean, basically what that means is that the space has been divvied up, right?
You understand? Like,
space has already been divvied up. But for you to get a slot to launch a rocket or something, like, you need to go take permission from the people who divvied it up.
The people who own it, apparently. Can you imagine?
You weren't in that conversation when when it was being divvied up. So it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Oh my goodness. Okay, so it's gonna start bringing it home now a little bit. So if I hear you right, Judith, if I'm not getting it right, please correct me. You're saying that the one thing that would unlock this whole game and set us on the right track or on the right trajectory is access to the technology, like increased access to the technology. If that is what you're saying, is that what you're saying? I guess.
So for me, right, I think access is fundamental. I think no conversation happens that makes sense without access. You know what I mean? It's like alternative to practicals. Like anything else you're saying, is it like, I imagine what VR is and then I can't, you know what I mean? I think it's ridiculous. So anything that anybody is doing where they haven't addressed the access problem yet, I think like it's a non-starter. Where are you coming from? For everybody there, it's like, hypothetically, in some years, you will have a headset and it might be able to do this. Guess how you'll feel about it then and tell us. Really? I mean, yeah. We definitely start from
So,
access.
if it is access,
Mhm.
I'll go one level deeper to ask, what is the one thing you think is going to unlock that access? I mean, you've been in this game. I'm sure you have
Yeah.
strong opinions about this. Is
Yeah.
it like what is it like? If there was one thing, what would it be like that would unlock this access thing?
Damn. I mean, such a great question. And actually, if I knew that one thing was that I've been chasing it with everything since, but like I think there is not enough of a shock to the system for the powers that be to shift things yet. You know what I mean? Now, the thing that could upend that is if there was something built or if people like leverage some of the global competition that's happening in the world and there was another headset from somewhere else and then that started to take over the continent, then everybody else would be like, oh, we don't want to miss out on that next thing and blah, blah, blah. But that's not happened yet. So we're just in a holding pattern now. What would be really cool to see is for the continent to rise and be like, you know what, let's build. We don't quite have sort of like all of the engineering expertise. We don't quite have like all those patterns and all of that, but we can build. We can build something. Like let's start somewhere. And let's get that conversation going. And then there's more skin in the game from more places and people might start to think a little bit differently. Because I think now, if we're being honest, people are just taking taking the continent for granted. You see a lot of initiatives happening for the technologies, right? For the advancements of them, for the integration of them into everyday life in other parts of the world. And even for the organizations that are kind of supporting that, you see like a lot of the initiatives that I think are really critical being geo-blocks to the Americas or to Europe, that sort of thing. And it's like, no, you can't look programs for schools, like the initiatives for like schools in the States where, you know, you can set up, you apply and get headsets and set up a lab or use it for your libraries and things like that. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, on the continent, we've got to get our own act together. So another important thing for me is that we have to have like a strategic agenda for these technologies on the continent. I think that's a long time coming. I think it's really telling that our leaders probably, if you had them in a room and you were saying to them, well, what you want, like what you hope for with these things, they probably couldn't answer the question. And I mean, that's probably true of like governments in a lot of places around the world. But I think that given how critical it can be for us, we've got to put an extra effort, right? Both in educating them and getting them to understand and being able to articulate what's important for us and what can move the needle in the region. Because I've always been of the belief that if we are united, and actually maybe this does answer your question, that if we're united and we speak with a single voice and demand, then something will have to shift. But that hasn't happened yet. But I can imagine that if all of the communities or with one voice made a heck of a lot of noise, because I think these days that's really important. Somebody would have to sit up and think a little bit differently about something. Or if our governments could be more strategic in terms of what they are leveraging for the advancement of these technologies in our different countries, that can make a difference too. So I think it's that awareness and then the action to follow it.
What stage is Imisi 3D in? Are you building a particular product? Like, are you building a platform, or are you building awareness in the ecosystem?
We're not building a specific product or platform. So our work is, because it's ecosystem development, like really is like it's spread across so much, right? So we're building and maintaining communities across the continent and growing those as much as we can. We have an initiative like our VR for Schools program where we have built content for specific to the Nigerian curriculum, for example. And that's work that we're definitely intent on advancing because it's at the stage where I've had conversations with people at institutions like the World Bank and like UNICEF and all of that. And I think we're all on the same page where we understand that if we're able to provide, like do the research, right, and provide empirical evidence that using VR as a learning aid can significantly improve learning outcomes, then you've got data where you can go and say, hey, you guys, if you're really serious about SDG 4, then this is what you do, right? So when you're advocating for what happens to those education dollars, like a portion should be going towards VR for Schools initiatives, that sort of thing. So doing that sort of work as well. Yeah, we occasionally do productions or support productions, and this is in the wider remit around the work that we do with the community in general, because of course, in service to the ecosystem, we're looking at how can we obviously support upcoming talents, but how can we get industry to understand how they can kind of like leverage these technologies? How do we bring these stakeholders together and get them to work together, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So on that journey, where is Imisi 3D at, right? So the ecosystem you're building, is it like Nigeria focused, or is it like Africa wide focused? Are you gaining more traction in some certain geographies versus others? What do you think could be done to help Imisi move forward?
Great. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, we started out in Lagos and we're headquartered in terms of our flagship lab in Lagos. But our remit is Africa wide, and we put our first labs outside of Nigeria. The first in Kigali at the African Leadership University. We also have one in Maputo in Mozambique. And actually, they had their first meetup last week, which is very exciting to see. And kind of like in a couple of months, we'll put one in a francophone country. So with this, for us, these labs are spaces where sort of like we hope to, with the provision of this access, see the building of community happening organically as all of the other attendant benefits of that growing. In terms of where we are, I mean, for us, every day it's like, how much further can our reach extend? And we're usually looking at that through the reach of some of the programs that we do. A major one is the training and the hackathons and all of that. And for the last major training, sort of like hackathon series, which was 2022-2023, we had participants from 42 African countries and just over 3,000. And for us, that's really important because with those sort of like, so with the very first kind of like training hackathon combination in 2016, which was an event that was wholly physical and in Lagos, we had that sort of like Pan-African dream or vision at the start, but we're able to realize it. But even with that hackathon, we had applications from as far away as Botswana, right, and Zambia for that event that was supposed to happen in Lagos. So just to know that there's that sort of like interest elsewhere. And now it's been a steady journey of what can we do to accommodate it and get resources and support out as widely as possible around the continent. How can we bring people together? Because a lot of our work is really based on the partnerships and the collaboration that we're building with people who have invested around the continent as well.
I always say this, like, I remember first time I met Judith, she was talking about this XR, VR thing. And I was like, yeah. And then, and then I asked her one question. I was like, okay, like all this is great, but like, what's your day job? What do you do apart from when you're not doing VR? What's like your real job? And she was like, this is it. This is all I'm doing. And this was in 2016, right? So at that point, I was like, okay, man, like if somebody in 2016 is saying, I'm going to make VR in Africa my full-time focus and is doing it, then that person must be really motivated and know what they are talking about. And for me, that was like that was when I started paying attention to VR. I'll just say that just because of that, just because of that statement. So winding it down, let's expand the scope a little bit to like the world of XR. Like, what's happening in the world of XR? What's the most exciting thing for you? Like, what are you looking forward to? We've had all this while it was Metaverse, Oculus, the de facto. Now we've got Apple Vision Pro that is changing the game. Who's gonna win? Right? Or like, talk to us. What do you think like the future holds, and what's the most exciting thing?
I mean, well, first of all, I mean, sort of like the Vision Pro coming out is everything because it's been such a long time. Every year it's like, is Apple releasing his app? And finally, last year there we were with that announcement in June. So absolutely thrilled that it's there now. And I think if anything, the most important thing for me is the signal, right? Like the signal to like the world and everybody who's like watching this space, because I think for them it was like, well, let's see if every major player comes in, and we know that Apple doesn't mess around. So, and when they're finally in, then there's nothing else to the conversation in terms of will it or won't it. It's just how. What does it actually look like in terms of the realization of the different kind of like use cases and all of that. So I think for what that is, that's great. That said, that $3,500 headset, I mean, clearly Apple is saying right now it's not for everybody. But what they are saying is that right now we've put out an exciting piece of hardware, right? To kind of like get the conversation going and I think get the space started. I really felt like when they did the release last year, I'm like, for all that the headset is supposed to be able to do, there doesn't quite seem to be a lot of content. And I kind of like see this first one as the warm up, right? Where people, especially devs, are going to get, and it's interesting to me that the dev kit program is going on. So you can apply actually almost wherever you are and like get dev kit if you have an interesting project to build for the Vision Pro. That it's really about sort of like getting them to get hands on and start to create really, really, really exciting content for that will leverage sort of like all of the functionality. Now, the question, at least for me, particularly sitting with my African continent hat on, is, and then at what price are we going to land at? I will say that taking it kind of like back to the Quest suite of like headsets, that the Quest 3 for me was very exciting. I thought it was an appreciable leap from what we had before from Quest. Like the mixed reality functionality and all of that was, a huge improvement in terms of what we'd seen previously. And I think that now that there's that tension between these two products, everybody will be looking for sort of like the gaps. And something interesting in our community. So, of course, there's been a lot of chatter about these headsets. And we recently had a poll where one of our community managers had said, what would you rather have? Would you rather have the Quest 3? Would you rather have the Vision Pro? Or would you like to build your own mixed reality headsets? And kind of like people voted. And I was actually very surprised to see people saying that they would like to build their own headsets. So right now, we currently have a challenge going where some people have put together teams and they're working to see if they can put together mixed reality headsets. But that sort of kind of like drive for me is some of the exciting fallout of this, where not necessarily what's coming out of a community in Lagos, but like similar initiatives in other parts of the world might then lead to some other sort of like exciting projects coming out in a year or two. And I think about products like, I think it was called sort of like Mirror, so something like that back in the day from the Bay Area, which was supposed to be this cost-effective alternative to the HoloLens. I mean, they were eventually acquired, but they had created a device that you could use with sort of like an iPhone 8 kind of like device that was giving you that whole mixed reality experience. And that kind of innovation, I'm very excited to see, particularly if it's coming from a place where it will then be much more accessible on the continent. The future, though, in general, where are we headed with all of the tech? I think we're definitely seeing sort of like not so much a rush now, but with a company like Apple, I think there'll be that steady march to the second version, which I think will be one for a lot of people to look out for, just in terms of what you'll be able to do with it. I think that obviously the Vision Pro now will make other people think, how do we up our game as well? And so expect improvements in the Quest 3 and like other devices as well as those start to come out, and interesting partnerships and collaboration happening, I think, to get people sort of like more competitive in the space as well. I actually kind of like firmly believe that some of the coolest use cases, I mean, obviously there are very exciting use cases that are happening right now in sort of like medicine, in a lot of like high risk, high cost environments where they're leveraging the technologies to do really exciting things. We're seeing lots of like really fantastic creativity from the arts as well. But I'm looking forward to sort of like do I want to call them fundamental, but almost like basic use cases, sort of like the education piece that I was talking about, right? Where you're seeing the technology have the potential to kind of like literally shift the dial for millions, if not billions of people. Because I think then it will really change the conversation and change the appreciation of these technologies, right? So moving it to that space you were talking about and making that description where it's this like everyday necessity. I mean, imagine it as a de facto tool when you're going to school, and for me, that was where this excitement with what's happening with generating AI and like the potential of combining that in virtual environments, what that looks like, where you are maybe able to deploy headsets and send them to children wherever they are, whether it's in IDP camps or at home or whatever, and they're still having a learning experience that is almost on par with what you would get in school. Now that changes everything, right? And that's something that I think any reasonable institution, a government or whoever who really wants to achieve that is able to really put funding behind the scale.
Wow.
What do you think of the Facebook's product, the integration with Ray-Ban, the glasses and stuff like the smart glasses?
So, I mean, so I think the smart glasses are interesting, and I think that it's not where it needs to be yet for it to be for it to be a lot of optics. I think that there needs to be a lot more utility to it. But I also think that glasses are something that will be a lot more easier to engage with for the majority of the world, right? So it is sort of like an appropriate vehicle to get people into that immersive future that we're thinking of, as long as it can do like more of the things that people would expect. But of course, the other thing with smart glasses is that there are these very real concerns in terms of what it means for people to be walking around with smart glasses and what that means for like the privacy and security of people all around them and how you start to address those issues. And I think that when we think about smart glasses and things like that, I mean, anybody right now can go and pick up the Ray-Bans and sort of like walk around with it and do all sorts of things with it, because not a lot of people will know about what it can actually do depending on what sort of room you're in. It really then heightens those conversations about the governance, digital literacy, like all of those pieces, and what that looks like for people who really do not know, who in spaces where they don't even have like the language for these technologies, right? As they are right now.
Amazing. Yeah. Like I was gonna say, in fact, Judy, maybe we'll bring you back for another edition because we didn't do justice to augmented reality in this conversation. To be honest, it was more biased towards virtual reality.
Yeah.
But that's even a whole other like thing, right? But yeah, another thing, like those folks working on the headsets, please put us in touch with them. We'd definitely love to even maybe have them at some of our sessions or
All
see how
right.
we can how they're doing or support or whatever it is. I'm really
Yes, please.
excited.
They're looking for mentors. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, please, please, please. Those are the things that get our juices flowing. Okay, so last word, Judith. Like, what do you have to say to our audience? What do you have to say? Like, how do you want to close us out?
It smells like so weighty and so heavy. It's an African deep tech audience, so I probably don't have to say this much the same way as I do to a general audience. But what I often tell people is you can't afford not to care or not to be involved. Now, you might say that, I mean, you don't have to be an XR developer, you don't have to be an XR evangelist, but what you do need to know is that these technologies are here and they're not going anywhere, right? And if you care even a little bit about the continent that you come from or the people that are there or anything, then if you're not going to do it, encourage someone next to you, or if you know someone that's even remotely interested, figure out how to help them, because we must get involved. There's just no other way. We must get involved to sit at the table, to shape the conversations around governance, to do all of those things. It's us. We can't delegate it to anybody else, and that means that as many people as possible get involved, get educated, get building. So whatever you can do to help, please do it, because you're shaping the future we'll have.
Wow. On that note, I think that's a great note to close. And I'd love to say thank you to our viewers. Thank you to Judith. Like we've been plotting this podcast for weeks, and it's been worth every second. Like
It's
this
been worth it.
it's been worth it. Really, really appreciate you making time for us. If you're watching, I'm learning this stuff. So this is where I'm supposed to say, please like and subscribe.
Yeah. Carol.
Oh, yeah. No. But yeah, I really appreciate everybody both working in front and behind the scenes. Zach, we see you to make this happen. But on that note, please like, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.